Thank you very much. It's great to be here, and thank you for the introduction. I really appreciate it. So, I first want to talk to you about that great think tank that was mentioned. One of the benefits of what I do, what I work, is I work at a bipartisan think tank in Washington, D.C. So if you talk about crossing that divide, that's one of the things that we do every day. So as you look at me, and I've looked around the room, you're wondering to yourself, why am I going to listen to somebody with a bunch of gray hair? He's clearly very old. I am actually really young. There are three reasons why I look really old. The first is I work in Washington, D.C. The second reason is that I'm a diehard Cleveland Browns fan. So I am scared for my life on this stage in Baltimore. And the third reason is this guy. This is my son. He's a little over a year old. And what I'm going to talk to you about today are drivers of change out to the year 2030 and beyond. And for me, it's very personal. My son is going to graduate from high school in 2030. What will his world be like? Will he be able to change and adapt with the times? Will he have the same opportunities that I had, or different opportunities? So it's really personal to me to think about this world of 2030 that I'm going to talk to you about, because it impacts my family. And I'm sure it'll impact your lives as well. So as I think about this world of 2030 and beyond, and think about these trends we talk about in 7 Revolutions, we have to first look back. I picked the year 1962. 1962 is the year in which CSIS was founded at Georgetown University, small little think tank. In 1962, if you're sitting there and you're President Kennedy and you're talking to the Soviet Minister of Foreign Affairs, what's going through your mind? Are you thinking, well, wow, I hope we can reach that space launch and land a person on the moon? And he meets that in that decade. Would he have been thinking about Pong becoming this really cool video game in the early 70s? Probably not. Would he have guessed that there would be a young Soviet leader? Remember, almost all these other Soviet leaders at that time were very old. In Mikhail Gorbachev in the early 80s. He probably wouldn't. Would he have expected the internet to take off in the early 90s? No, probably not. Or Europe to come together and create a common currency. So as you think back, there's a little bit of humility that needs to be put in place. One of the scholars at CSIS likes to say, be careful about looking too deep into a crystal ball because you might eat glass. So we think about this world of 2030 and think about some of these trends that may impact it. Will it be a more dangerous world? A world in which we see forces like the economic recession return across the United States and globally? Or will it be an improved world, a world of abundance, a world in which some of the things that we've been talking about come to pass? At CSIS, we've thought about some of these questions, and we believe there's a framework, 7 drivers that are going to impact our lives out to the year 2030. What are they? Population, resource management, technology, information, economics, global security, and governance are 7 drivers of change. I'm going to go through each one of them one by one with a series of subpoints to mention. The first of these is population. If you think about it, we've gone a long way. We have over 7 billion people on the planet. But that's really a product since 1950. That's where we've seen the bulk of the growth. And if you take this out to 2050, we're only going to cross 9 billion, so it's actually slowing down. We're becoming older and older on the planet. Worldwide life expectancy in 1950 was about 46 years of age. Today, that number is close to 70, and again, that's going to probably slow down into the late 70s. The last piece is thinking about urbanization, this process of moving from rural environments to urban environments. In fact, there were 7 times as many people living in those rural environments as urban environments 100 years ago. Today, that number is roughly 1 to 1. 2030, that'll be 60% living in urban environments. 2050, that'll be 70% living in urban environments. In the United States, we will cross 90%, very likely, in the amount of people living in cities at that time. Resource management, our resources. For those optimists in the room, you might want to look away during this section. It's not a great future. However, food has been pretty positive. If we think about how much food we've been able to produce on the planet, it's really grown. It's outpaced the inputs that we've had. However, we still have a huge percentage that is hungry, but that percentage of individuals that's hungry has been overtaken by the amount of people that are overweight and obese. So I'm wondering if we're fighting the wrong battle going forward. Water, a second critical element. If you looked at this presentation of 7 revolutions, and we've been doing it for 20 years, 10 years ago, the water map for the United States was much better. We're in a significantly more water-stressed environment going forward. And lastly, energy. We talk about renewables all the time, but it is a fossil fuel trend for as long as the eye can see in this future. The reason for that is multiple, in that we have geopolitical concerns, where we get our energy sources from, thinking about the role of unconventional shale gas, tight oil, other positive factors, and also thinking about infrastructure. As much as we want to do things with renewables and biofuels and others, if you don't have the infrastructure in place to deal with those new energies that we're trying to bring online, it doesn't really matter. So as you think about this future of resources, we really need to make a lot of changes, because that climate change piece that a lot of you have thought about is going to get worse. We're talking about a 3 to 4 degrees climate change impact globally. A lot of people are now focused from that global environment to the regional impacts, because it's not the same across the board. Technology. So now that I've depressed all of you, I want to talk to you about some exciting things that are going on. Going to Moore's Law. You have to go back to Moore's Law. Really cool thing. Moore's Law is essentially computing power doubling every 2 years, and it has been since the late 50s. As we think about Moore's Law and its impact, imagine in a 10-year time frame going from creating a structure the size of your house to the size of a postage stamp. That's what computing processing has done during this time frame. It's creating really amazing supercomputers. The world's fastest supercomputer today pumps out 17.6 quadrillion calculations per second. That would be like everyone on the planet with a calculator, including my son, 350 years worth of calculations. They still wouldn't do the same amount of calculations this supercomputer can do in an hour. So that's what we're talking about in the forefront of computing technology. I like to show a happy robot as opposed to a sad Terminator-type robot when we talk about robotics. I'm hoping that there's more happy robots in our future. Thinking about limbs being replaced by robotics. Thinking about exoskeletons. I'm sure all of you have seen Avatar and those great movies that we've created. Thinking about autonomous vehicles, the Google car. Imagine that person that's blind or that person that's disabled doesn't have to worry about that in the future. He'll have a ride to get around. Thinking about biotechnology, the huge advances we've made in biotechnology. $1 billion+ genome 10 years ago in 2003, $1 million genome about 6 years ago, and this year we're hoping that we'll cross a $1,000 genome, so a major change within 10 years. That's leading to all sorts of amazing advancements in interesting fields like bioprinting and others. Epigenetics. The last is material science. I'm sure a lot of you have talked about things like additive manufacturing or personal fabricators. You can now go to Staples and buy one. And they have little cartridges that you can purchase and put inside of it to print objects and do some modeling. I like to think about products like graphene. It's a single layer of carbon atoms, super, super strong, super, super lightweight. Maybe replace Kevlar in the future with graphene. It's also a supercapacitor, so you can make batteries. And then when you're done with the battery, because it's just carbon, you can take it outside and throw it away and you don't have to worry about it. Just imagine some of these major changes in our future technology could play. Really amazing. And then you start putting them together, and I start freaking out a little bit. It gets really, really scary. So some of these fields are crossing over. One in particular that I'm really worried about is brain hacking. I'm sure all of you in this room have seen the movie Inception. My biggest worry is that the next Inception movie won't be a feature film, but it'll be a documentary. People are already experimenting with ways to look at images and they come across to you and make how you make your decisions and determine whether they can influence that. The fourth revolution that I like to talk about is data. Huge, huge growth in data. In case you want to know what we're talking about, it's not gigabytes, it's not terabytes, it's It's not petabytes. It's not exabytes of data. We're talking about zettabytes of data that are created every year. It is a lot of data. 4 zettabytes to be exact by the end of this year. 4 zettabytes of data would be like everyone on the planet tweeting 3 times a minute for the next 2,513 years. That's what we're talking about with data on the planet. So filtering it's really important because it's only going to increase tenfold between now and 2020. We're connecting ourselves and connecting the planet in various ways. 2.4 billion people on the planet have access to the World Wide Web today. Individuals like Eric Schmidt and Jared Cohen suggest that by the end of this decade, we'll have everyone online. I don't know if I'm as optimistic as them, because if you take a look at the planet in places like sub-Saharan Africa with energy poverty, I don't know if we're going to be connecting them fast enough. And on top of that, the internet is shaped and changed in many, many different ways. It's not just your cell phones, it's not just your servers anymore, it's our connected cars, our alarm clocks. I'm starting to see things like smart packaging, smart meters. We keep connecting objects to this infrastructure. The 5th revolution, really exciting to me, is global economics. And hopefully it's going to get to some of these poverty questions that have been mentioned in previous, in that if you take a look at globalization and its impact, we've talked about, during this time period, a growth in the human population of about 2 billion people. Well, during the same time period, we're going to have 3 billion people added to the global middle class. That's at about $10 a day. So start thinking about what you can purchase if you have $10 a day in your account. You're going to switch from fruits and vegetables to more processed foods and other things. What types of products can you develop for that? The new players on the scene. I think this gets beaten to death. But thinking about the rise of China, maybe a rise of India, really exciting for me. It changed my life. When I went to Beijing in 2004 and looked around at one of the things I saw, I was like, there's no way this country is going to host an Olympics in 4 years. It was amazing to see how much change had occurred in that country over that time period. But they're growing, and they're growing very rapidly. However, that growth is going to slow down. It's going to slow down at the end of this decade, and it's going to slow down in the 2020s. Lots of major factors for it. As you've moved from an agrarian economy to industrial economy, that change, that rapid change actually slows down your economy at a certain point, because you can't keep up with those manufacturing jobs that you might have had in the past. The other thing is they're going to become older than the United States. As much as we talk about aging in the United States, China is going to be older than us in a decade. So that's really amazing, maybe even scary. Trade. Our leaders have failed us on trade. They still describe trade as a finished product that is traded and moved around. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about the iPhone and all the value derived from the iPhone, and you hear about China all the time. Only $8 of that value is their manufacturing. Global trade has changed dramatically just in the last decade. How we're sourcing components, the supply chain, dealing with the services that are traded. Global trade is changing, and it's really helpful as we think about that diversification. Global debt. We're also talking about that quite a bit in the United States and elsewhere. As you think about global debt, the G7 economies, for the most part, are going to be the big global debtors. We're going to need the bankers. We're going to need probably not microfinance transactions, but something else to fund us in our future. Sequestration as a topic that's going on right now really is only a Band-Aid for about the next 10 years in the United States. We're going to go right back up to the levels that we were today. Security. I don't know how to describe this. I'm really bad. I drew all these slides, by the way, so if you have a problem with it, it's my artwork. But I think of it somewhat as like a bouncer, right? We don't really know what's coming down, but we're trying to prepare for everything. We don't know what to call the environment. It's not a post-9/11 environment, not a post-Cold War environment, it's something else. So as we think about some of the factors that impact us in our planet, it's really 2 things that we need to focus on. Complexity. The world is so complex today, and it's getting more complex. The second factor is if you look at the rise and fall of great powers, we've actually never seen a period in which that's been a peaceful transition. You could make a case that at the end of the Second World War, that was somewhat peaceful, but for the most part, they've been violent. So can we manage that rise of China where we might have a relative decline in the United States? Drugs and thugs. Transnational threats are really important. They touch almost every place on the planet. This is some place that if you're looking for an idea, a way to impact our world, if we could fix this phenomenon, it would be really instrumental. Cybersecurity. Moving away from our day-to-day discussions of hacktivists and moving on to the more physical nature of these attacks, things like Stuxnet and Shamoon and others that have damaged global infrastructure. If we've done such a poor job with our desktops and a poor job with our mobile phones, does it make the Internet of Things a really good idea when we start connecting all these other devices to the planet? I think it's going to make Best Buy a good company to invest in the future because that Geek Squad person is going to be running around fixing everything. Infectious disease. Really important to think about this as a security risk. We have really bad alerting structures, and it was great to hear a presentation about that. As you think about this as an issue, if you looked at things like swine flu in the past and how it spread across the planet, there's actually an area, a little area throughout the middle of Africa, just above the Sahara, where you don't have any really good data on whether swine flu has actually impacted that area. My guess is it did. But again, we need to think about this. Maybe some of you need to figure out a way to get this technology to different countries, particularly I'm thinking Africa and Southeast Asia. Revolution number 7 in the area of governance. Thinking about identity. It was sort of mentioned in the last talk. How do you see yourself and how do you organize is really important as a concept. For me, I was a Boy Scout, which is really cool to hear about other Boy Scouts. I went to school in Ohio for undergrad, Ohio Wesleyan. I went to graduate school at Kent State. I decided to go out to DC and try my luck in publishing. I then moved over into IT and started doing other things. Someone was like, hey, you can create videos, great. Go create videos. And so I've bonded with lots of different people over the years based on my experience. And it's actually good for me to come outside of DC to talk to other people so that I can make new connections and expand my network. Not just how we organize, but who do we organize with and who leads some of the organizations is really important in the future of governance. So thinking about global corporations and their impact. If you looked at the top 50 economies and combined it with revenue of companies, you'd find that 8 would make the top 50. How do they engage in this future environment? Thinking about the rapid rise of NGOs that's really taken off since 1992. And lastly, we've talked about the Arab Spring or the Arab Awakening in the past. I'm sure a lot of you know a lot about this particular issue. What are the next countries that might face turbulence and revolution during this time frame? Is it a country like Nigeria where the North and South could always have the potential to split? Is it a country like Yemen where they don't have resources? What's the future of revolution in some of these areas? So for me, it's a great opportunity to come address this audience again. Going from down in DC and coming up here and talking to university, different experience. What I've had some success with in this is the ability to go talk to corporations to do strategic planning. But at the same time, I've been working with educators, working with professors, working with students to take this material, this trends analysis, and start thinking about our futures. How can we integrate this into curricula? We have about 60 universities that are teaching a form of 7 revolutions today, which is really great to see. Most recently, in the last month, I've had a few high schools decide to join. I'm just starting to expand into the international environment as well. So I want to thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have had an opportunity to start thinking about your future. Thank you very much.